yeah, we had a little issue with capacity, but we are back, and I would like everybody to unmute right now and give a huge cheer and hooray. Are we ready? Awesome. Now I'm muting everybody, so that's all going to stop. So this is so great, and as I said when we were just joining, every single thing that we did, every single person here, every letter that you wrote, every signature that you got signed, every speakers bureau engagement that you did with the 5 people at the county library, every one of those things has been a part of this victory. And it's very, very meaningful for Ohio and beyond Ohio, for redistricting and for democracy in general. So we are so pleased and we are so proud. And we're going to go through a little bit today. Obviously, we haven't had a lot of time to read the decision carefully. We will be sending out more detailed information tomorrow. You know, kind of stay tuned. But we have lots of information for you, and we have lots of things that we would like for you to do. So without further ado, we are going to be talking about the lawsuits. We're also going to hear about redistricting that's going on in other states and some actions. Of course, when we send this out, sorry, sometimes it doesn't like to move. Then it moves all at once. There we go. It'll change eventually. When we send this out, you'll get all the links, and the links will have sorry, I'm just trying to see this here. There should be a link here to the decision. If there isn't, we'll put one in for you later so that you can actually read the decision yourself, because there's a lot of really great stuff in there. And now I am going to pass it over to Colin Marazzi from ACLU of Ohio, who's going to just tell us a little bit about this decision. And I've got in the background some quotes that you're free to read, and I'm not going to read them aloud to you. You can read them yourselves. But Colin.
Well, thank you, Mia, and thank you, everybody, for being here. What an understatement, but obviously today is a very good day for all voters and all people of Ohio who believe in fairness and in representative democracy. You know, I really can't say enough about how much work this group and all of our other dedicated reformers have put into this process to get to where we are today. Just a tremendous accomplishment. So everybody should sleep well tonight, knowing that that hard work for the time being has paid off. Now, apologies off the bat. I've literally spent the last 2.5 hours reading the opinion. So please forgive me if my thoughts are a little scattered as I try to hit the highlights of today's decision. So the basics are pretty much that it was a 4-3 decision, essentially, or exactly the way that we anticipated it would fall, with Chief Justice O'Connor siding with the 3 Democrats on the Supreme Court and the 3 remaining Republican justices forming the minority. It's you know, it should be noted, and there was some chatter about this in the before the meeting started, that Chief Justice O'Connor did not write the opinion of the court. That was Justice Melody Stewart. But rather the Chief Justice did offer a concurring opinion in which she outlined, you know, some steps that may need to be taken, or what she views as something that is worth considering for the future. And that is the working to further amend the Constitution to create an independent redistricting commission. We will save that discussion for another time. But that is significant that she did take the time to draft that separate concurring opinion. But essentially, the nuts and bolts, the meat and potatoes of this decision really lays at the center of what our case was, which is, does Section 6 in and of itself have teeth and have an actionable remedy? And like and as we predicted, the justices, the majority of the court agreed with us that in fact it does. Without getting too much into the legal theory and reasoning behind it, essentially, there's a great blurb from the decision that I saw that I thought was pertinent, and it's, the majority rejects the notion that Ohio voters rallied so strongly behind an anti-gerrymandering amendment to the Ohio Constitution, yet believed at the time that the amendment was toothless. They just wouldn't allow that to be taken as true. They know what we know, which is partisan fairness was the linchpin of that amendment. It was what got us out to the polls to vote in favor of it. It was not the mechanical construction requirements in terms of splitting counties and jurisdictions like that. No, it was the fairness criteria that was included. So it was great to see them pay that clause of the Constitution its due respect as the linchpin of that article. They also thought incredibly convincing the expert reports that were submitted as evidence for these cases. One really, what I really think was a critical part was Dr. Kasuki Amai's algorithm that he put together to create 5,000 sample state legislative maps using the neutral criteria included in the Constitution. And due to that algorithm, he found that of the 5,000 sample simulated maps that his algorithm created, none of them, 0 of them, created as high a partisan skew as the map that was adopted. 0 out of 5,000 recreated the partisan effect that the adopted map created. And it's interesting that the justices really kind of called that out and really used that to discern the intent of the legislature. And I've got a couple other short quotes that I pulled from the opinion that really illustrate this. One quote is, using Article 11's map drawing criteria, Dr. Amai generated 5,000 possible district plans. Of those simulated plans, none was as favorable to Republicans as the adopted plan. They go on to say, when a single party exclusively controls the redistricting process, it should not be difficult to prove that the likely political consequences were intended. So there you can see that they tie the intent of a extreme outlier map to the effect of creating a highly partisan gerrymandered map where they did not attempt to create districts that correspond closely to partisan preferences. They also hammer in on the 8C2 statement, which, if you remember, is the justification that the commission gave for creating a map that sends roughly 65 districts to Republicans. Remember, this is the 81% threshold because Republicans have won 13 out of 16 statewide elections. The opinion completely throws cold water on that, in as eloquent and as legal verbiage goes. They essentially said that this legal theory, this proposition that 81% of Ohioans favor Republican candidates is simply absurd. So we were pleased to see them call that out for what it is, which was essentially just an absolute, ridiculous justification for trying to couch this map as closely corresponding to the state voter preferences. And finally, we look to see, when following the oral argument, when the Supreme Court asked both parties to give additional information as to what the Supreme Court's authority is given, the 4-year map. This is what's called the 8C argument, if you'll see that in any sort of press briefings or stories. They're talking about when the justices asked for additional information as to their ability to review and strike down a gerrymandered map or any map that's been passed under the 4-year simple majority vote threshold. It appears as though Justice Fisher, one of the Republican justices who dissented, was the main driver of this question. In his dissenting opinion, he said that precludes the Supreme Court, that 8C requirement precludes the court from providing remedy. Again, we believe that argument and that legal reasoning is severely flawed. We made the case in our supplemental filing that a 4-year map passed by a simple majority is the map that deserves the most amount of scrutiny for gerrymandering, because that is the scenario in which gerrymandering is most likely to be a driving factor and a primary reason for adopting that map in that manner, and a simple majority vote only for 4 years. So we're very pleased that the majority of the justices took in our argument, saw the validity of our arguments, and sided with us. So again, it's a 146-page opinion. There are 4 different opinions with all of the majority, the concurring, and the dissenting opinions. So it is a longer read. I look forward to actually getting in there and really diving in the coming days. But I wanted to close my summary of the decision by saying, yes, we feel fantastic right now. This is a great day and a great time for redistricting reformers in the state. However, this is not the time to rest on our laurels. The Supreme Court, knowing that the February 2nd filing deadline and candidate declaration petitions is rapidly approaching, they said they gave the Ohio Redistricting Commission 10 days to draw a compliant map, which would then be subject to Supreme Court review and also still subject to a subsequent challenge. So there is potentially much more that is going to be happening, but we do know and we do expect the Supreme Court to be monitoring this very closely, and they have set much more strict and constraining timelines than the 30 days which are provided in the Constitution. So it's going to be very rapid paced, a lot of action coming in the rest and next week, I assume, to get a new set of maps adopted and approved. But we should all, take solace again in today's achievement. Really, everybody should be feeling very good about themselves tonight and all the work that they've done. I haven't been monitoring the chat, but if there are any questions, I'm more than happy to try to answer as many as I can. Mia, I don't know.
There's one question, and then Jen's going to come in and say some words. Michael asks, will the legislative maps, so the ones that they redraw now, will those be for 4 or for 10 years?
These, they would still be 4-year maps.
Okay.
Yes.
Very good. Okay, Jen, do you want to jump in?
Yeah, can everyone hear me and see me? I just want to say to all of you that this is your victory. I am so honored and proud to stand with all of you. I've been doing a lot of interviews, and I'm just so thankful for each of you and for all of those that you organize beyond the 200 that are on here. And so you're going to hear about all the things that we need you to do now. But at every step of this process, when we've asked you to show up, you have more than met my hopes, right? You've continued to impress me, and I think all of us. And so now we need to lean in again. And I just want to express my profound gratitude to each of you. and a happy new year, and my love to each of you. And you, I'm going to have to go because I'm still on media interviews and now I've cried. So I've got to fix that before I get back on the screen. But, you know, look, yes, we had impressive lawyers. Thank you, ACLU National and ACLU Ohio. Freda Levinson is a goddess, in my opinion, who should earn some sort of sainthood status. You know, we stand on the shoulders of people like Joan Lawrence. Catherine Terser is the amazing, as is Mia and everyone here, you know. So, but please understand that Catherine and I and Mia, we can't be fair districts, right, without all of you, and without all of the organizations that participate. So I'm going to let you guys go back to the questions and what's next, but I just wanted to jump on and just share my deep love and gratitude for each of you. Please be well. And please participate in the way that makes the most sense for you over the next 10 days. So thank you.
Thank you, Jen, and thank you, Colin. I do see a few other questions in here. Sorry, I'm just wrangling my slides, trying to get them to behave. There we go. Yeah, so this slide here is just kind of for interest. I know Michael put that in the chat already, but it is kind of fascinating that Justice O'Connor put this in her concurring but separate opinion about, you know, the work that still needs to be done to make sure that this process is smoother in the future. And I think I'll just leave that there because that's a whole other can of worms. Any other questions in the chat? Colin, have you had a chance to look through there?
Yeah, and there seems to be some commonality between some. So I think this will help clear things up. And I should have mentioned this in the when I was giving my summary as well, but the court also explicitly identified the 54-46% split in votes gained or votes won by the two parties in their opinion. I know Mia has a slide up here with the specific section, but the court explicitly says that the commission has to attempt, and if we want to look through the rest of the opinion, they define attempt as in they have to do it unless a specific mechanical construction requirement would prohibit this. But we know that's not the case. So the court has said for a map to be compliant, it has to mirror as closely as possible the 54-46% split, which was the number that we all were using to determine proportionality. From the conversations I've had with our legal team, it does not seem as if an appeal to the to the United States Supreme Court would be fruitful for the state, with the Rucho decision essentially laying at the feet of state Supreme Courts the requirements for overruling or throwing out gerrymandered maps, partisan gerrymandered maps. It would seem to be, it wouldn't seem as if the Supreme Court would then turn around 2 years later and say, oh, well, we'll actually take a look at this now. So for state legislative maps, we don't think that is a likely scenario. However, anything's possible. So we'll have to wait and see on that development.
And some of the questions, thank you, Colin. Some of the folks, the questions in here really are a little bit more relevant for the discussion of the congressional map. So why don't we go on to discuss the congressional map? I don't know, Colin, if we are still waiting for a decision. Do you have anything in particular to say about that, Colin?
I really don't. I don't want to take up too much oxygen in this meeting. We are still waiting on the opinion. I think it is reasonable to assume that now that since we've had one decision come down, we can expect the second to follow suit shortly. Again, I don't have any sort of hard indication when that may be. Candidly, this decision took longer than anticipated to come out. So I don't want to continuously be overly optimistic, but As soon as we hear something or, there are any developments, we will make sure to be in contact with you all as soon as we can.
Awesome. Thank you so much. Catherine, do you have anything you'd like to jump in and say, either in response to anything that's in the chat or anything else?
Well, if you go to the next slide, I think one of the things that I think is important for folks to know is that there was a hearing on the 28th for the congressional maps. That's something you can watch on the Ohio channel. I highly encourage it because it's interesting, the whole debate over what does unduly mean, what is competitive, some of those kinds of things are it's very interesting to think about the questions that are asked. And then I also wanted to highlight today that U.S. District Judge John Adams placed a 60-day pause on the case that was challenging the Mahoning Valley area of the map. So this is in federal court. And essentially the judge said, hey, the entire map is being challenged in state court. So we're going to wait, 60 days. Let's wait until this is over, because we could actually be holding hearings and there would be no reason to actually do that. Now, I'm kind of excited about the next things, are like, what should we be doing in the next 10 days? Any questions on this area for folks? And then why don't we proceed?
Yeah, I think the order of our slides here actually is we're going to jump over to Suzanne and have her talk about some things that are going on in other states. And then we're going to come back and tell you what we need you to do. But there are many things that we need you to do, and it will be a busy 10 days. And let's front load that 10 days. So let's have it be busy for the next, couple of days, and hopefully give the Ohio Redistricting Commission its marching orders. But with that, I'm gonna pass it over to Suzanne. This is a very sad cartoon, which is how I was feeling earlier in the day when I put this cartoon in this slide presentation. But now that we have some better news, I should put something happy in there. Anyway, Suzanne.
Thanks so much, Mia. And I am so excited that I get to talk to all of you today of all days. I feel like often when I'm popping in here to talk, it's not necessarily good things happening, but today good things are happening. And Mia, can you hit me to the next slide,
Yes,
please?
yes.
I'm just going to talk really briefly. I know I'm not here I'm not here to talk about the thing that you're here to listen about, but I do think it's really important to kind of get the big picture, to understand what's happening across the country, right? So in the majority of states, they have completed redistricting. Most states have completed congressional redistricting, 26 states, plus those 6 states that only have 1 congressional district. And then a significant number of the legislative maps are done as well. Many states, this means they're turning to local redistricting. So we're starting to see kind of news stories and more information about county councils or school districts all being redrawn and redistricted. And we know that there are activists from across the country who are really digging in to work on that process too, because it's just as important. As expected, there is a lot of litigation. But before I talk about litigation, I just want to, one more note on the states that have completed. I think we're seeing a mixed bag this year, right? I don't think we can say necessarily that one party is winning and one party is losing overall. Not that that's something I would want to dig into anyway, because I think the most important thing is whether communities are protected. And we're seeing kind of across the board that communities are the ones that are taking the brunt of this redistricting cycle, right? We're seeing a reduction in the number of competitive districts. Whether or not competitive districts are the highest priority is something that I think we can debate, and it's a long conversation and debate for another day, but we do see a reduction in the number of competitive districts kind of across the country. And part of that is as a result of political geography, right? We know that in this last census, more rural areas lost population and urban areas gained population. And we know that more Republicans live in rural areas and Democrats live in urban areas, which again means that there's some political geography going into this calculation of whether or not a district is competitive or not. But nonetheless, it is likely to continue this trend of more solid D, more solid R rather than purple-ish districts. So talking about litigation, and again, this is a very high level overview. I'm not going to go into facts in any of these, but I do want to talk about kind of 4 buckets of litigation that we're seeing. The first, and I think I've talked to y'all about this before, is impasse litigation. So those are states like Pennsylvania, Minnesota, where parties have filed litigation essentially saying, hey, court, we don't think that the General Assembly and the governor will agree on a map or set of maps in some states. And so we want you, court, to take control of this process. We want you to be the one to drive the bus, set a schedule, we'll provide the maps and the briefs and all of that, and argue in front of you. So there are 2 states in particular that I usually think of with this. It's Minnesota, which has been going on for a very long time, including a significant briefing, participation by common cause, legal voters, lots of other in-state allies. And then Pennsylvania, which was filed earlier in 2021, and then was refiled just the very end of December. So I think that, that's one of the places that we're seeing, and that's actually a place where we're seeing a lot of proposed maps go into court and courts being asked to decide among or between those maps. The second bucket is violations of state constitutional criteria. Now, Ohio obviously fits in this bucket, and that's great. And I love the way that this is working out for you. In some states, it's really specific, like Ohio and the Section 6, right? Like very specific partisan fairness requirements. In other states, it's a broader fit under the state constitution. So think North Carolina, where they're talking about free and fair elections and protections around the Voting Rights Act. Think Pennsylvania, again, with the Pennsylvania Free and Fair Elections Clause. So we are seeing kind of a lot of focus on what we can do in the context of state constitutions. And as Colin mentioned, this is because of the Rucho case in 2019, where the United States Supreme Court essentially said, hey, partisan gerrymandering, not our problem, state courts, you take it from here. So we are seeing a lot of those claims happen in state courts. And then the next bucket is kind of a racial gerrymandering Voting Rights Act bucket, right? So these are claims under either the Equal Protection Amendment or the Voting Rights Act that essentially say Black or Latino or Asian voters their votes have been diluted or diminished based on the way the districts are drawn. In some states, and North Carolina is a good example of this, they're in that state constitution, right? It says you have to comply with federal law. You have to comply with the Voting Rights Act. So their claim is under color of state constitution, even though it's using kind of that national law around what we do to protect voters of color who have historically been disenfranchised. So I want to talk a little bit about trends, right? And there's 3 of them that I'm going to highlight today. There are more. We could talk about this forever. And also, please note, these are trends. This does not mean that it applies to every state. This conversation is not the same in every state. And so these are just kind of things that we are seeing over and over again in a number of states that are probably worth highlighting, right? So the first is what we are calling so-called race-blind redistricting. So first of all, just to be very clear, there's no such thing as race-blind redistricting, right? Because you can't erase the data that people have in their heads about where populations of color live, right? So you're not ever going to be able to take all of that away. Second, even if you could, you wouldn't want to, because the Voting Rights Act requires you to consider race. Not too much, it can't be the predominant factor, but it does need to be a part of the calculation. But what we're seeing in states like Texas and North Carolina and Georgia is that lawmakers, for the most part, these are legislatures drawing the maps, are saying, hey, I didn't look at race. This can't possibly be a racial gerrymander, regardless of the impact on these communities, right? And we know that that's not true, but that is a talking point that we're hearing over and over. And I know that we've heard in Ohio as well. The second trend is nothing is easy, right? You saw in Ohio, and even though we have a fabulous result today, and I am thrilled over the moon, it's the best news I have had in several weeks of my life, that it was still a fight to get here, right? We still had to go all the way to litigation to get here. So nothing is easy, right? Even in independent commission states. So I'm thinking California, I'm thinking Colorado, I'm thinking Michigan. Keep in mind, none of these states, all of these states have an initiative process. Yes, Trevor, I don't see color, that's perfect. All of these states have an initiative process. So Ohio does, or that is different than Ohio's. But even in states like Michigan and California, there was so much work that activists had to put in to make sure that the maps came out okay. And there are questions in states like Michigan about how okay those maps ultimately are, right? Are they better than the status quo? Yes. Do we know how they're going, whether it will be as good or as fair or as equitable as they should have been? Again, that analysis is still happening. So I think it's important to remember, and sorry, because this is a little bit of a Debbie Downer point, that nothing is perfect and everything takes an incredible amount of activism and watchdogging to pay attention to make sure that the process, even a pure process, even an independent process, works the way it's supposed to. And then the third one is politicians gonna politic, right? We know that when we give legislators the ability to draw maps, and Ohio is a prime example of this, but it's not the only example. We're seeing it in Pennsylvania, we're seeing it in Maryland, we're seeing it in Delaware and Indiana. They are going to push the boundaries of what's acceptable, right? Because their job as a political animal is to gain power for their party. And so as we continue to gather data, as we continue to understand more about how redistricting processes are happening across the states, this is one thing that just keeps popping up. Like, of course, that General Assembly is going to draw a skewed map because that General Assembly is made up of people who are self-interested in the results of that map, right? So it's depressing. It's not like something that I'm super excited about, but that is something that I think is a lesson that we can take. And finally, it's not on this slide, but I think one of the trends that we are seeing, and Ohio is a particularly fabulous example of this, is really the power of activism, the power of activists, the power of community mapping and outreach and talking to your friends and neighbors, right? We are seeing this story of communities coming together to tell their story, to make a difference in the map, happen over and over and over again across the country. And that could erase everything else, everything is on this slide, right? But that piece, that the fact that we the people do actually have the power to make an impact, to make a difference, is the piece that will be carried forward as we start strategizing for the next round of maps, because we have to do this again in somewhere between 4 and 8 years. And with that, I'll toss it back to Mia.
Thank you, Suzanne, so much.
Hey,
And
can I
so
jump
it
in
is-
on one thing? I think we don't actually know if the commission approves the maps in a bipartisan way, and especially if the courts then also, the court says that the maps are fair or constitutional, it might actually be a 10-year. We don't know yet, so we just ask you don't answer because our lawyers are not sure. Okay.
Very good. So to be determined, we shall see. And I know we have a lot to cover tonight. Gary, are you still there? I've been waiting to call on you.
I'm still here.
Here. Okay, very good.
Okay, I wanted to get back to the congressional map. for
Okay,
just a
very
second.
good.
We have been having discussions with the attorney for the Mahoney County plaintiffs. We were planning in the next several weeks or less to file either an intervener or an amicus brief in that case. I would like to hear from Colin what he thinks will happen if the same panel of Supreme Court justices are hearing the Supreme Court case. But I also want to point out that we have the same grievances that the Mahoney County people had. My 8% African-American county was put in the district where there was no other county with more than 2.5% African-Americans in the fair districts map. we were actually, in terms of a rural urban divide, we were far better off with the adopted map than in the fair districts map, because in the adopted map, our district would have been 74% urban. And in the fair districts map by Mr. Hagner, it was only, we were the only county out of 5 that was an urban county. So I am not sure that even should the Supreme Court make a ruling that we will not be in federal court. And Colin, if you could give me some guidance here. I mean, we would think that if we are an urban county with 8% African Americans, and Mahoning is an urban county with 16% African Americans, and Trumbull is an urban county with 8% African Americans, that is a more appropriate place for us than a district where we are the only county with more than a 2.5% African American population.
Colin?
Yeah, so first, let me just preface by saying I'm not a lawyer. So this is just, I can't give a legal opinion. I would say, however, that Ohio's historic voting patterns have not required the creation or the protection through Section 2 of the Voting Rights Act, which is where all the racial gerrymandering challenges stem from. In order for a Section 2 claim to be made in a state, there needs to be 3 factors. One is a large enough minority population to constitute or reasonably constitute a congressional district, whether or not there is racially polarized voting and whether or not there's racially block voting, meaning to put it in the simplest terms, white people vote for one candidate, black people vote for another candidate. In Ohio, it's been found that that environment does not exist, and that environment is necessary in order to have to have special status under a Section 2 claim. And Suzanne, if I'm misstating something, please feel free to jump in here. I can't say for certain how the prospects of the success of the federal litigation on the congressional maps, just because Ohio has not enjoyed those protections in the past. And I don't know if circumstances have changed enough in the state to warrant those protections. So Gary, I'm sorry if that's not a strong answer or a good answer, but that's kind of what I have right now.
We'll have to, wait and see, I guess. I think, Gary, is it okay if we kind of continue on? I
just wanted to say one more thing.
Yeah.
The attorney who is representing the plaintiffs from Mahoning County won a case involving legislative districts, I believe, in Mahoning County in Armour versus Ohio, 775 FSUP 1044 in 1991. And his argument is that those findings about the way that there had been racial gerrymandering, apparently on smaller districts in Mahoning County, would be controlling because of the past history, at least in Mahoning County, of racial discrimination in voting. Obviously, Attorney Squire would be better able to speak to that than I would.
And without providing too elaborate of a response to that, Gary, I would say that I believe in the Armour decision. First of all, the Sixth Circuit, the makeup of the Sixth Circuit has radically changed since 1991. So there's no guarantee that precedent will hold. But also, I believe the elections that they were disputing, or the districts they were disputing in that case, were much more local, what you just said, local county commission races, things like that. The population required for a congressional district protection under Article 2 is much greater than so I just think that the population, the environment for a congressional district challenge on those grounds I'm uncertain of the level of success that will enjoy. But again, that's just my initial take.
Yeah, and we'll have to see, but we're going to leave it at that for now. But thanks for bringing that up. I did want to say, John Gray has a question in the chat. Should we be recommending one or several of the citizen maps? And we, as fair districts, are going to be working on a kind of amalgam map that has the best parts of our different maps that people drew. So we're going to be in touch with you with information about other maps, like our map that we want to put forward. Sorry, I'm having trouble with my slides jumping around. Okay, here we go. Here is the slide that I'm trying to get to. So looking at the next 10 days, we have created an email, an action that you guys can do. And I think someone will put the link in the chat, Catherine just did, to email the Ohio Redistricting Commission to tell them to, obviously they have to get back to work incredibly quickly, but we want them to do some things while they're getting to work. We want them to hold meaningful public hearings, to hear from experts as well as voters. We want them to conduct a process with full transparency, and we want them to prioritize the needs of communities over short-term partisan concerns. And so when you click on that link, you can send that email. You can rewrite it however you want, or you can just push send. That is up to you. But that's important for us to be in touch with them, to let them know that we're still paying attention. We've been paying attention all along, and that these things are still very important to us. You guys have, hopefully there will be hearings. Write some testimony, write about why the map, what you're looking for in a new map that's better. Write a letter to the editor. It's a great time to write a letter to the editor. You can highlight the maps that were created by Ohioans that are in the redistricting competition or the Ohio Citizens Redistricting Commission. There are a lot of good maps. You may not like them all. They may not all be perfect. If you don't like them, feel free to draw new ones or to say what you're looking for in a map. So please email the Redistricting Commission. And then at the end of that action, it actually has Bob Cupp's phone number, and we're targeting him to say of all of the people, we are asking you to contact him and to tell him, why it's important to have this process be a genuinely fair process this time around. Another thing is the Freedom to Vote Act. So all along we've been talking about, the success we've had just now with our legislative maps, with our Ohio House and Ohio Senate maps. But we're still waiting to hear about the congressional maps. There is a provision in the Freedom to Vote Act, which is a specific ban on partisan gerrymandering. So we are more hopeful that if this bill itself or some version of it were to be passed, that we would get some relief when it comes to gerrymandering of US congressional districts. So we're really hoping that folks will be in touch with Senator Portman. We have rewritten this action. This is a new action. We are acknowledging that Senator Portman says he doesn't support the Freedom to Vote Act. He thinks it's a takeover of elections by the federal government. And we are refuting that point. And we are saying that is not true. It is not true. And it is very important to pass the act and why it is important. So please take a look at this action, both of these actions. In addition, Common Cause has phone banks every single night. And what they are is you're calling voters in mostly Arizona and West Virginia, and you're calling those voters and trying to get those voters to call their senators, to call Senator Sinema and Senator Manchin, to try to persuade them to support the Freedom to Vote Act. So it's not an Ohio action, but it is an important action. And it's one way that you can work to support the Freedom to Vote Act. Catherine, anybody else on who wants to jump in and say, either answer questions that are in the chat or jump on with things people should be doing?
Well, I noticed that there was a question that was about, well, what about the congressional maps? How will that map making process work? If the court says, hey, you need to go back to the drawing board, and that will go to the state legislature. Colin, do you want to talk about possible next steps if the state legislature doesn't get it done?
Sure. So for the congressional maps, there is a two-step redraw process outlined in the Constitution. First and foremost, if a map is deemed invalid, the Supreme Court sends the Ohio General Assembly back to the drawing board. They would be the first body that would have a crack at drawing a new and compliant map. It's our assumption that that would mean that an entire new piece of legislation would have to be introduced, or or just the traditional legislative process will apply. So it could be amended into a current piece of legislation, or a lot of things could happen. And the General Assembly would have at the most 30 days to redraw a compliant map. However, as we've seen with the state legislative opinion, that the Supreme Court could choose to make that a much shorter timeline, as they did for here, where they said you only have 10 days. Following the expiration of whatever window of time the Supreme Court allocates to the General Assembly to redraw the maps, then that process kicks over again to the Ohio Redistricting Commission that will have an additional window of a determined amount of time to create a fair map, or create a compliant map. So again, that's the two-step process. The General Assembly will have the first crack, and if they can't get it done or don't get it done, it'll move to the Redistricting Commission following that. Just to kind of answer any possible questions, if the Redistricting Commission can't get their act together to pass a compliant map, the Constitution is silent following the Commission's chance to redraw. So I can't say for certain what would happen in that scenario if the Commission would fail to draw a compliant map. I think we would have to leave that up to the discretion of the Supreme Court to issue a final order with to help clarify that process.
Mia, could I make one point, please? This is Richard Gunther. I'm one of the 5 authors of Article
course.
11. And I would like to point out one thing that I think is very important, and that is in the call for letters or emails to the Redistricting Commission, there was no mention of representational fairness. And I'd like to point out that representational fairness and sections 6A and 6B were the centerpieces of the Supreme Court's decision today. And I think that it is a mistake for us not to underline the importance of representational fairness in all of our communications with the Redistricting Commission.
Very good. We will fix that, and we will put that in there. And I'd just like to have a round of applause for the folks who've been in this from the beginning. I know we've all worked hard, but some of us have worked harder than others. And so, Professor Dick Gunther, Catherine Terser, others who are on here who've been, working at this for a really long time. We appreciate everything that you've done. And we also, want to say that there have been a lot of, criticism has come when those bad, horrible maps were drawn. Of course, there was a lot of criticism, and we understand why people were very, very upset. And this is in some way a vindication of the fact that we did get rules strong enough to be held up in court. I mean, that's what this is all about. So, those rules are vindicated. It doesn't mean we don't need to make them better in the future. That's another separate discussion. But this is a vindication, and we do want to talk about representational fairness. We can change our email and make sure we, let folks know that that's an important point. The map. This, Chris Glass, the court has given the Redistricting Commission 10 days to draw new Ohio House and Ohio Senate maps. So that's happening very, very quickly. We don't yet know about the congressional maps because that decision hasn't come down yet. You know, that is to be decided.
But is there a drop dead date for, you know, primaries that are coming up and other things that are happening? Is there a drop dead date that we need to have this done?
You mean if they fail to do it within the 10 days and then something else happens and something else happens? Yes, eventually it would end up either we'd have to move the primary or some other, you know, relief would have to happen. So I don't know exactly what that date is, but it's coming up very soon. There's not much leeway here at all. Catherine, anything you want to say?
Well, one of the things that I know is that the next 10 days are going to take a lot of us coming together and quickly paying attention and attending hearings and doing everything we possibly can to ensure that we get good state legislative maps. And I don't know about you, but I have found the State House an incredibly difficult place to work at and to go to, and it feels like they don't really listen to us. And knowing that we can get them to actually create district lines so that we can participate in meaningful elections could mean a much more functional state house. So even though we're going to be tired in the next 10 days, I encourage all of us to kind of keep up our energy and do everything that we possibly can to ensure that they know that we want fair districts and that Ohio voters completely deserve to participate in meaningful elections. And so keep on keeping on, and thank you all so much. I just completely appreciate all the hard work we've done so far. And now we just have to do a little bit more. And thank you.
Just a little bit more, just a little bit more. And think about the fact that if we fix, you know, the State House, those folks are the ones that are going to be doing the redistricting the next time around. So this is a long-term project, but we have made a significant step towards fair maps and fair representation. So we started with a huge cheer. Maybe we should end with a huge cheer. Everyone come off mute and let's just give it one more hip, hip, hooray. Ready?
Hip hooray.
1, 2,
Hip hooray.
3.
Hip
Hey!
Hip
hooray!
Awesome.
Right.
The government for, by, yeah.
Keep going, keep going.
So much.
All right.
Thank you, thank you.
Thank you.
Thank
you all.
Thank you.
Thank you. And
Thank
you'll
you
get
all.
something from us in
Thank
the email
you.
tomorrow.
Yeah, perfect.
Gracias por todo.